What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today we are continuing our deep dive into Keyforge. We are looking at all of these houses and all of their themes, and today we are going to be having a nice little look at logos. We haven't looked at anything from logos yet. I thought it might be fun to have a look at logos, and one of the things that's really cool about logos is that they know how to archive cards. Now, archiving is one of those mechanics where when I was first looking at the game, I didn't get it. Archiving basically says you can put cards off to one side. It is your archive, and at the beginning of your turn, you can choose to pick up your archive. Now, you either pick it up or you don't. There's no choosing or any of that rubbish. You either pick up your archive or you don't, and I didn't get it, ladies and gentlemen. And then I played a few games, and I got it. One of the things you can do is just stash cards away. So I was looking yesterday or a couple of days ago at Dis destroying creatures, and I was looking at Gateway to Dis. And it allows you to destroy every creature on the field. So you can archive this card, and if your opponent ever ends up with a really good set of creatures out, one that's starting to worry you a little bit, you just pick this up, make sure this is your active house, and you've got that card when you need it. Now, of course, you can just keep the card in your hand, but at the end of your turn, you draw until you got 6 cards in hand. So if you're holding a card for later in the game, that is going to clog up your hand and really hurt your options. Generally speaking, you either use the card, you discard the card, or you keep it in your hand knowing that it is hurting your draw and hurting your options throughout the game. Archiving allows you to stash it for when you need it. But my favourite use of archiving is just chucking all cards from one house down. Now, in every Keyforge deck, you've got 3 houses, and you've got 12 cards from each of those houses. So, with 6 cards in hand, if you can get 3 or 4 of one house, you're probably doing quite well. But if you can archive 5 or 6 cards from one particular house, you could legitimately be playing 9 or 10 of your 12 cards from one house in one go. Now, that's not going to happen every single turn. Might not happen every game. But I have had turns where I can play 8, 9, 10 cards from one house in one turn, and you can just drop a devastating turn on your opponent. So let's have a gander, ladies and gentlemen, at all the different ways that logos can go about doing this whole archiving malarkey. Now, Knowledge of Power is a really nice card, and you actually get a little bit of an option here. Either you archive a card, or for each card you have archived, you gain an ember. So this actually adds another little nuance here, because what you can do is just try and build up your archive, and then just play this to draw a whole bunch of ember. Of course, one option you do have is just archiving cards you don't want to play throughout the game, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. And I should mention at this stage, there's no automatic right to archive a card. If you're going to archive a card, you'd better have something like Knowledge is Power that you can use to actually archive. This is nice. Now, quick rule in query, where it just says to do something like this, archive a card, unless it specifically says otherwise, you are doing so from your hand. We've also got Lab Work. Now, Lab Work lets you archive a card. Seems a bit weaker, but it does have an ember bonus there, so you get an ember bonus and you archive a card at the same time, build up that archive, wait for a nut's turn. Seriously, if you've never had one of those archive turns, it's hard to kind of understand quite how powerful this mechanic can be. But when you're picking up 4 or 5 cards from one house and you've got 4 or 5 already in your hand, you can just go absolutely nuts. Play down 5 creatures in one turn, play down 6 actions. I've done these things and it's wonderful. Now, slightly more dodgily, riskily maybe would be a better word, we've got random access archives. Now, the good thing about this is that you get an ember bonus. When you play it down, you get an ember. Yay, life is good. However, when you play it, you archive the top card of your deck. And this could be really, really good or really, really bad. You might end up archiving a card that you want to play really, really soon. The other thing is, when you pick up your archive, it's all or nothing. which means that if you play this and you archive a card from the wrong house, then you might end up clogging up your hand later on in the game. I like random access archives, sometimes, but oh my lordy, it can be a pain in the neck. Just like sloppy lab work. Good news, Ember bonus, yay! When you play it, you archive a card. This sounds familiar. That's what Knowledge is Power does. That's what lab work does. But you've also got to discard a card, and just like everything, this could work or it could backfire massively. Because, you see, if you've got a card in your hand you don't want, you discard it. Now, what's really, really nice about this is that you can discard any card from your hand. At the end of your turn, you draw till you've got 6 cards in hand. During your turn, you can play or discard any cards from the active house. What this allows you to do is discard a card which is not from the active house, meaning that you open up a bit of space in your hand to draw extra cards without having to worry about this card being in your active house. That's very nice, but there are going to be games where you really want to archive something, but you really don't want to discard something, and at that point this card becomes sadness-inducing. And we do have an artifact in Logos, which will allow you to do a bit of the old archiving. It's Mobius Scroll, and what you can do is you archive it, and you archive up to 2 cards from your hand. So you could just archive this, which would be a little pointless, but you could. Or you could archive 1, or you could archive 2. No more than 2, but you can archive 2. And this just helps you archiving. Now again, this could potentially end up clogging up your hand later on, because of course you would have to take this, and I've got a Logos deck of a lot of archiving and a bunch of Mars cards, and what I like to do is archive all my Mars cards, because with cards like Soft Landing, for instance, where you can play cards active, and Ammonia Clouds, where you can do a bunch of damage, I can do some devastating turns there. It's just annoying when I pick up all my Mars cards and then I've got a Mobius Scroll in my hand. Sure, if I want to be a Logos next turn, great. But if I want to be one of my other houses next turn, that's a little bit annoying. Now, in terms of creatures, we do have a couple. Ganymede Archivist. It's a free power, it's nothing particularly special. But when you reap, you archive a card. Now, if you can have, say, 3 of these in a deck, which I do in my good Logos archiving deck, then you can potentially be archiving 3 cards of the same house in one turn and really set yourself up for a fun turn later on. It's got low power, but it's just good for archiving. We have Novu Archaeologist, which has an action, archive a card from your discard pile. Now, the good thing about this is, there's a couple good things about this. Firstly, you have a much, much wider option of what you're going to do here, because there's generally more cards in your discard than in your hand. But secondly, it almost lets you grab whatever card you want for next turn. You archive a card from your discard pile, make sure it's of the house you're going to choose next turn, and then you pick up your archive next turn and you've got that card ready to go. In that respect, it's really, really nice. The downside is it's an action, so there's no fighting, no reaping. That's all it's actually doing. And then we've got Research Smoko. When it's destroyed, you archive the top card of your deck. It's random access archives as an action when it is destroyed, and you know what? It's exactly like we talked about with random access archives. Sometimes this is really good, sometimes this is really annoying. And although it's not really archiving for you, I do need to give a quick shout out to Dysania now. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. 4 power creature, meh. But what I really like here, when you play it, your opponent discards each of their archived cards. You gain 1 ember for each card discarded in this way. I had to mention this in this video. Obviously, if you're building up a large archive, you need to know if your opponent has got one of these, and if your opponent does have one of these in their deck, that will basically stop you doing your archiving thing. Or you have to be extremely clear to only start archiving when your opponent's got it in their discard pile, or etc. Or when it's already on the field, so then they're not able to use it as a play ability. This really restricts your options in terms of archiving, or if it's yours, you get to restrict your opponent's options. And although it isn't a logos card, I cannot finish this video without mentioning Uxlix the Zookeeper. When you reap this, you put an enemy creature into your archive. Now, this isn't archiving in the way I've been describing in this video for the reasons I've been describing in this video, but what it does do is it just archives your opponent's creatures, which is brilliant. Now, the downside is, if you pick up your archive, as I previously said, if you pick up your archive, you pick up your whole archive. And when you've been using Uxlix the Zookeeper, when you pick up your archive, you have to give your opponent their creatures back. So this is a very, very, very different proposition to what we've been talking about in this video. But I couldn't do a video about archiving without at least giving a quick mention to Uxlix. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That's logos and that's archiving. And now we're at the time of the video where I want to hear your stories. Tell me your archiving stories. Tell me what cards you've got that archive. Tell me the fun you've been having. Go nuts, but please do remember the most important rule of all. Be nice, would ya? And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, where I ramble about stuff and you can join in. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves. Until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.